The modern world lures us into giving away our freedom. The vast majority of adults are caught in an unfulfilling cycle of consumerism. They sell decades of their lives to employers so they can buy consumable goods and status symbols that don't make them happy. In doing so, they deprive themselves of time they could be spending on the pursuits and people they care about. As retired astrophysicist Jacob Lund Fisker argues in Early Retirement Extreme, it's possible to break out of this system through a combination of frugal living, skill building, and smart financial management. With these strategies, Fisker built a life for himself that allows him to survive on just $7,000 a year. After saving 75% of his income for just 5 years of salaried work, he permanently retired at age 33. In 2007, Fisker began sharing his frugal living advice on his blog, Early Retirement Extreme, eventually collecting, organizing, and adding to his blog material in the 2010 book of the same name. In this guide, we'll detail Fisker's view of modern consumer culture, outlining his argument that you should abandon this mainstream lifestyle. Next, we'll explain how to follow in Fisker's footsteps by retiring at an extremely early age. First, we'll offer tips on how to minimize your living expenses. Then, we'll explain how to increase your financial security by diversifying your skills. And finally, we'll discuss how to invest your savings and become financially self-sufficient for life. In our commentary, we'll examine other popular ideas from the early retirement community, which will provide intellectual context for Fisker's argument and help you save even more money. We'll also highlight counterpoints to Fisker's point of view from books including 168 Hours, and I Will Teach You to Be Rich. New section, The Problem, the Cycle of Consumerism. Fisker argues that the dominant cultural narrative of the modern age influences people to work far more than they need to survive. The average worker believes that the ideal life is to be as busy and productive as possible, earn as much money as they can, and then spend that money on consumer goods. For this reason, as their income increases, they increase their spending in lockstep rather than saving their money and buying back their time by retiring. They don't question this narrative and end up living unfulfilling lives. Short-form note, some take Fisker's idea further, arguing that work isn't just a dominant cultural ideal, it's the primary religion of the modern age. While Fisker says that most people work to increase their income and buy more consumer goods, writer Derek Thompson points out that many people, particularly white-collar workers, now see the work itself as the prize and the way to fulfill their life purpose. To these workers, saving their income to retire early would be undesirable, as it would mean giving up their ultimate source of meaning in life. Is life as a habitual consumer really so unfulfilling? Fisker says it is, offering 3 reasons to break out of the cycle of consumerism. Reason number 1, your purchases don't make you happy. Reason number 2, habitual spending keeps you dependent and vulnerable. Reason number 3, paying off debt wastes precious time. Reason number 1, your purchases don't make you happy. Many people falsely assume that you can find happiness by spending money, asserts Fisker. Because the dominant cultural narrative defines successful people as those who earn and spend the most money, people who want to feel successful spend excessively on status symbols with little intrinsic value. For example, you may buy a large, lavish home not because you need that much space to live a good life, but because it signifies to others and yourself that you're a success. We'll discuss Fisker's opinions on large homes in more detail later in the guide. Short-form note, not only can you not find happiness by spending money, but research also shows that some purchases may make it harder for you to find happiness. Although many people purchase status symbols to impress others, one study found that displaying luxury items actually discourages others from getting to know you further as a potential friend. If status symbols don't really improve personal relationships, it's possible that people seek them primarily to prove status to themselves rather than to other people. Others seek fulfillment in the intrinsic pleasure of accumulating possessions. They enjoy building collections of items that are personally meaningful to them, like antique toys or designer handbags. Short-form note, how do you distinguish a fun collecting hobby from unhealthy hoarding? One rule of thumb, collectors are typically proud to show off their collection to others, while hoarders hide their collections out of shame. Fisker argues that both of these spending habits position spending money as your life's source of meaning, and consequently, they lock you into a cycle where you feel you always need to spend more to be happy. Spending money becomes a compulsion, something you feel you must do rather than something you want to do. Short-form note: compulsive spending is a medically recognized disorder also known as oniomania. If you're aware of your compulsive spending and want to stop, experts advise creating a relapse prevention plan. Identify the people, places, and situations that trigger you to make a purchase, and avoid them to reduce the temptations in your life. For example, if a date recommends meeting at a local shopping mall, suggest a different location. Reason number 2: habitual spending keeps you unskilled and dependent. According to Fisker, people in consumer culture are unskilled because they've internalized the habit of solving their problems by spending money. They deprive themselves of the opportunity to grow through solving their own problems. Consequently, they become dependent on the products they buy. For example, if they don't have enough warm clothes for the coming winter, most people will go out and buy some. They believe they need to do this, but in reality, there are many solutions that don't involve such an expensive purchase. They could learn how to tailor hand-me-down clothes into scarves and layered jackets, learn how to trap heat in their houses more efficiently, or even move someplace warmer. When you believe you need to buy a certain product or service to survive, Fisker argues that this limits your freedom by creating the illusion of a greater cost of living. You believe you need to work more to afford all your expenses, so you spend all your time working rather than pursuing more fulfilling activities. Counterpoint: outsource your problems to save time. Although Fisker laments the fact that people in modern culture solve most of their problems by spending money, some argue that this isn't always a bad thing. Often, people spend money to deal with problems they're fully capable of solving well, just to save time. In 168 Hours, Laura Vanderkam argues that more people should hire services to take care of common but time-consuming tasks, like laundry, cooking, and cleaning the house. Doing these simple tasks yourself isn't necessarily central to your personal growth, as Fisker implies. Vanderkam notes that this allows you to spend your time in more valuable ways, like playing with your children. Fisker would likely argue that spending on services like this can create the illusion of a greater cost of living. In other words, if you get used to hiring someone to do your laundry, and can no longer imagine living without it, you may work additional hours to maintain this service rather than spending your time in more fulfilling ways. Vanderkam offers advice you could use to avoid this mistake. Track how you're spending every hour of your time for a week and proactively build a weekly schedule around your highest priorities. This way, you can notice when you're spending less time with your kids because you're working to afford unnecessary expenses and intentionally look for ways to reduce your hours at work. Reason number 3: paying off debt wastes precious time. Debt is one of the most limiting constraints possible on your time and freedom, says Fisker. Going into debt means selling your future time and labor to buy something now. Additionally, you've committed to selling more of your time to pay interest on that loan. The deeper in debt you are, the more time you must waste working to pay interest, and the less time you'll have to live your life the way you want to. Despite this, it's common practice in modern culture to live perpetually in debt. Fisker argues that it's almost always entirely unnecessary, and against your best interests, to take on debt of any kind. This means only purchasing something when you can afford it instead of racking up credit card debt. It also means foregoing auto loans, expensive mortgages, and student loan debt. We'll explore how you can avoid these seemingly necessary major loans a little later in the guide. Comparing debt culture around the world. Although Fisker doesn't acknowledge this, the view of accumulated credit card debt as socially acceptable is largely unique to the United States and a few other first-world countries. In most cultures around the world, debt of any kind carries stigma, and the average citizen avoids it completely wherever possible, following Fisker's advice by only making purchases if they've saved enough to afford them. Why do so many cultures see debt as shameful? One possibility is that these societies have internalized Fisker's logic. If it's common wisdom that going into debt requires a compounding commitment of your future time to make interest payments, you may see taking on debt as a foolish decision subject to judgment from peers. Alternatively, debt may trigger a deeper form of shame, the feeling that you've taken money from someone else, yet failed to make this exchange fair through repayment. In other words, people may see debt as an inability to right a moral wrong. This cultural shift can be jarring for immigrants to the United States, where credit card debt is not only less shameful, but also sometimes socially encouraged. To attain a valuable credit score in the US, you must take on some debt, and then reliably pay it off in full, typically with a credit card. American society penalizes you for staying completely debt-free, as people without a reliable credit history may be denied or charged more for housing, insurance, and personal loans. New section, The Goal, Buy an Early Retirement. Fisker explains that you've escaped the cycle of consumerism when you're no longer buying things that won't make you happy. Once you've done this, it's possible to buy yourself an early retirement and only work as much as you want to. People differ in how much they want to work. Many choose to pursue total financial freedom as quickly as possible, saving up enough money to never have to work again, a lifestyle that Fisker argues is more attainable than most people believe. Alternatively, some people may not feel the need to immediately swear off work for the rest of their lives. In this case, Fisker notes that you can save enough so you can partially retire, only needing to work a few hours every week. Another option is to save enough to buy back your freedom in the short term, a mini retirement, you might say. For example, if you save 87.5% of your income for a year and live off of the other 12.5%, you can quit your job and live off your savings for 7 years. How do Fisker's ideas fit into the broader early retirement community? Fisker's recommendation to only work as much as you need to is the primary goal of the FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early movement. The FIRE movement describes the many authors, bloggers, and other workers on the internet who have dedicated themselves to spreading the message that early retirement is more attainable than our culture makes it seem. The movement's intellectual roots lie in the 1992 book Your Money, or Your Life, which, like Early Retirement Extreme, contends that it's possible to escape our culture's typical working schedule by building your life around your personal values. Fisker has stated on his blog that this is one of the two main books that shaped his financial philosophy, the other being Rich Dad Poor Dad. In the online FIRE community, Fisker's strategy of partial retirement is known as barista FIRE, since it involves finding a part-time job of some kind, like barista. On the other hand, Fisker's suggestion to take some time off work in a mini-retirement would technically be a sabbatical rather than a form of FIRE, since you intend to go back to work and retire at a later date. Such a mini-retirement would actually delay your FIRE, as you spend time using up your savings rather than contributing to them. To survive off of such a low income and retire early, Fisker argues you must learn to do 3 things: minimize your expenses, diversify your skills, and invest your savings. The rest of this guide will outline specific ways to accomplish these 3 goals. Short-form note: many FIRE enthusiasts focus mainly on investment advice and make it their goal to increase their passive income as much as possible. Fisker sets himself apart with his emphasis on minimizing expenses and diversifying skills. Fisker is more philosophically aligned with proponents of frugal, simple living like Joshua Fields Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus. Minimalism. New section, Tips for Minimizing Expenses. According to Fisker, most people can do without many things they think they need. As you lower your annual expenses, the time it takes to save for retirement drops rapidly. Lowering your expenses not only leaves you with more income to save, it also means you'll be free of that expense every year you're retired, so you don't have to save as much before retiring. Short-form note: Fisker suggests cutting your expenses as much as possible, a retirement strategy known online as lean FIRE. However, other early retirement experts advocate a strategy called fat FIRE, which involves aggressively seeking ways to increase your income and delaying your retirement to attain a fund large enough to support a lavish lifestyle after retiring that's full of travel and other costly experiences. Fat FIRE requires a far greater fund size than lean FIRE, since, as Fisker explains, recurring expenses require you to save an additional sum for every year of retirement. However, exponential growth from pre-retirement investments arguably makes this more attainable than it might seem. Here are Fisker's 3 tips on how to minimize your cost of living. Tip number 1: avoid unnecessary debt. Tip number 2: don't buy things you don't need. Tip number 3: maximize the value of every purchase. Tip number 1: avoid unnecessary debt. As mentioned earlier, minimizing your living expenses means refraining from taking on debt of any kind, including auto loans, mortgages, and student loans. Now, let's discuss how to do this. You don't need auto loans. If you need to buy a car, Fisker recommends saving up and paying for it in cash to avoid taking on debt. That said, he says it's better not to own a car at all, if possible, as it's one of the biggest expenses the average person has. On top of the cost of the car itself, fuel, maintenance, and insurance costs can add up and significantly delay your retirement. The best way to avoid owning a car is to plan ahead when choosing where to live. As long as you live close enough to walk, run, or cycle to your workplace and a grocery store, you can live without a car. Additionally, walking, running, or cycling every day is a great source of exercise, improving your overall health and helping avoid unnecessary healthcare costs. Car owners should live in walkable areas too. Arguably, Fisker's advice to avoid owning a car isn't feasible for everyone. For instance, if you need to frequently visit family and friends who live in different cities, you may deem car ownership a necessary expense. However, some experts on frugal living agree with Fisker that living close to work and grocery stores saves large amounts of money, even if you own a car. This is because, for the most part, the expenses of car ownership add up per mile you drive, not evenly over time. Every mile you drive requires more fuel and wears out parts of your car, reducing the time before your next repair. The exception is car insurance, which you pay at a fixed rate no matter how much you drive, but you can minimize this fixed expense by driving a cheaper used car rather than a new one. Additionally, the average American spends about an hour a day driving. If you lived closer to the places you needed to go and spent that hour engaging in cardiovascular exercise, walking, running, or cycling to get around town, you could significantly reduce your risk of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. In short, even if you own a car, you benefit from driving as little as possible. You don't need a mortgage. Many adults believe that the most responsible housing decision they can make is to invest in real estate by taking out a mortgage and purchasing a starter home. Fisker disagrees, arguing that although you gain equity as you pay off your mortgage, this addition to your net worth is more or less counterbalanced by the interest you have to pay. For this reason, purchasing a home with a mortgage is no safer than investing the principal of any other loan. Although it's possible to make money as your house appreciates in value, it's always possible for the housing market to decline. Because real estate is an uncertain investment, Fisker argues that renting a place to live can be more economical than buying a home. Sometimes, you can make more money by taking what you would spend on a mortgage and investing it elsewhere. Whether it's more profitable to rent or buy depends on the strength of the real estate market relative to other investment markets. Instead of worrying about the value of your home as an investment, Fisker recommends viewing it as just another living expense. If you do want to own a home, Fisker suggests saving up and paying for it in cash to avoid paying mortgage interest entirely. This is especially possible if you choose to buy a small home. Fisker argues that most people buy houses that are too large and expensive, which serve as mere status symbols and places to hold unneeded possessions. By living somewhere smaller, you can massively reduce your annual expenses, regardless of whether you rent or buy. How a housing market crash could impact homeowners. Fisker warns that buying a house isn't a surefire investment, as it's not a foregone conclusion that the investment gains will cover the interest on your mortgage. However, if the housing market suffers a major recession or crash, the consequences of a poorly timed real estate investment could extend beyond the financial loss. Fisker mentions you could default on your mortgage, and the bank could foreclose on your home. In the 2008 housing crisis, this happened to millions of households. If the homeowners who lost their homes in 2008 had bought smaller houses within their means, as Fisker recommends, many of them might have been able to weather a recession while making their mortgage payments. Fisker might argue that these homeowners had foolishly bought a nice house because they wanted a status symbol to hold more status symbols. However, others argue that the idea of owning a nice house is a key component of the American dream. In other words, these homeowners didn't see their house as a status symbol, they saw it as proof that they were virtuous, hard-working citizens who embodied the ideal American. While keeping your mortgage reasonably small is a relatively safe strategy, the most reliable way to protect yourself from a housing crash would be to buy a home in cash, as Fisker recommends. This would ensure that you have a place to live even if your income dried up entirely. How a crash could impact renters. According to Fisker, the primary advantage of renting rather than owning your home is that you can invest your savings rather than putting them toward a down payment and mortgage interest. However, a severe enough real estate crash would likely have negative reverberations throughout the economy, as it did in 2008, jeopardizing your investments in other markets. Despite this, renting rather than owning a home could help you mitigate the downside of a potential market crash in other ways. If you're renting your home during a crisis-level crash, your landlord might default on their mortgage, and although legal protections would allow you to keep your home until the end of your lease, you could then be evicted by the bank. While this isn't ideal, you'd likely be better off than if you were the one who defaulted on your mortgage, as you wouldn't suffer major damage to your credit score. Healthy credit would give you a better chance to secure an affordable loan on a future home. You don't need student loans. Fisker acknowledges that college degrees have some value, but he claims that much of the time they're not worth the investment. You need a college degree to gain access to a number of white-collar jobs. However, skill-based jobs like elevator mechanic or cable installer often pay just as well and allow you to start saving immediately rather than paying off debt. Short-form note: increasing numbers of students nowadays share Fisker's point of view, seeking employment in trades rather than higher education and white-collar opportunities. In 2022, mechanic and repair trade schools reported an 11.5% increase in enrollment from the previous year, while traditional four-year colleges reported a 3.4% decrease. In regard to the college education itself, Fisker argues that most college programs won't add much value to your life. He claims that most students in higher education are looking for the credentials necessary for a white-collar job and nothing more. Colleges looking to attract students have changed to cater to these desires, offering increasingly easy, entertaining classes with little true educational value. Short-form note: although Fisker contends that colleges have eroded their value by watering down their curricula, statistics show that the average four-year degree still confers a 25% boost in wages. Even courses in less marketable subjects provide students with valuable skills. For instance, one study shows that graduates of the University of Central Florida's Gender Studies program demonstrate proficiency in project management, a skill that researchers say increases students' earning potential by 22%. Tip number 2: don't buy things you don't need. To reduce your living expenses, buy less stuff, says Fisker. This, however, is easier said than done. How do you keep yourself from buying things you don't need? One tactic Fisker recommends is to cut out impulse buying entirely with a wish list. Whenever you feel the urge to buy something, add it to a list and move on with your day. Only allow yourself to buy something after it's been on the list for 30 days. This way, you have time to adjust to life without that item, and you may discover that you don't want or need it as much as you thought. Short-form note: when you're tempted to buy something you don't need, you may struggle to muster the willpower to simply write it down and move on. You may find it easier to curb your impulse buying with a tactic called the envelope system. To do this, identify a type of product that you habitually overspend on, such as clothes or snack foods, and budget how much you're willing to spend on it for the next 2 weeks. Put this physical cash in an envelope and only allow yourself to buy that product with the cash from that envelope. This constraint, which makes it more physically and psychologically difficult to overspend, will hopefully reduce the amount of willpower you need to exert to avoid impulse purchases. Another money-saving tactic Fisker suggests is to stretch your ability to deprive yourself. Choose one major expense in your life and cut back to an extent that feels extreme for a set period of time. Afterward, you'll feel comfortable spending much less than you used to on that expense, and the new normal will feel indulgent in comparison to the extreme deprivation you put yourself through. For example, if you spend $60 a month on various movie streaming subscriptions, try canceling all of the services for 9 months. After those 9 months, you'll have found other sources of entertainment and will feel content paying for just one streaming service at a time. Short-form note: this tactic has its roots in ancient Greece. The Stoic philosopher Seneca intentionally set aside days to practice poverty, eating less, wearing ragged clothes, and sleeping in a less comfortable home. By temporarily making a life of deprivation his new normal, Seneca hoped to overcome his fear of losing everything. This highlights an additional advantage of Fisker's version of the exercise. You may find yourself feeling less anxious as you recognize that unexpected financial hardship wouldn't necessarily be so bad. Tip number 3: maximize the value of every purchase. Fisker recommends reducing your living expenses by maximizing the value of every purchase. Many products produced nowadays are built cheaply so consumers can use them up, throw them away, and buy new ones, as this is the financial model that's most profitable for the companies selling them. To avoid falling into this trap, buy quality products that last. Even if they're a bit more expensive, it's cost-effective in the long run if you get many years of use. Another way to escape the cycle of purchase and disposal is to look for opportunities to buy things used or pick them up for free. These opportunities are everywhere on online marketplaces. Likewise, Fisker recommends selling your possessions when you're done with them. Short-form note: in contrast to the linear economy that Fisker describes, in which consumers use up products, throw them away, and buy new ones, some experts promote the idea of a circular economy in which companies design products to last as long as possible, facilitate the sharing of products between consumers, and recycle the material to make new products. By living the frugal lifestyle Fisker recommends here, you're not only saving money, but you're also pushing our current system toward a circular economy. Your money goes to companies that make quality goods and to online platforms that support the exchange of goods between consumers. New section: Tips for diversifying your skills. According to Fisker, diversifying your skills is a key component of the early retirement lifestyle. Most people strive to be highly valued in the labor market by specializing in a single area of expertise. However, if you cover your entire cost of living with the income from a single skill, you'll be especially vulnerable if that income is disrupted. For instance, if new specialists enter your industry and competition becomes fiercer, you may struggle to hold a job in your field or earn income any other way. Rather than creating a life for yourself that depends on you profiting from a single specialty, Fisker recommends building a diverse set of skills. This way, you'll have the skills necessary to get a job in a wide variety of fields, if necessary, making you resilient to disruptions to any one industry. Uniquely valuable skill combinations. A diverse skill set is arguably even more valuable to employers than Fisker describes. While Fisker asserts that having a variety of skills is valuable primarily because it lets you get jobs in a variety of fields, others argue that a diverse set of skills is worth more than the sum of its parts. There are certain things that only people with a specific combination of skills can do. For instance, to be the creative director of a marketing department, you must know how to both craft compelling advertising and manage a team. While professional-level skills are rare, unique combinations of skills are even rarer and are therefore more valuable. If your skill set is unique enough to make you irreplaceable, you've guaranteed yourself a level of job security resilient enough to outlast tough competition and other disruptions to your industry. In addition to diverse work skills, Fisker recommends mastering the daily living skills necessary to fix household problems rather than spending money to have others do so, or on products that do it for you. This helps you further minimize your expenses, making retirement a viable option sooner. For example, if you teach yourself how to paint your house, you won't have to hire anyone to do it for you ever again. Short-form note: experts have identified which DIY skills are most helpful for minimizing your expenses. Basic plumbing is relatively simple to learn for many people and can save the $75 an hour or so you would have to pay a professional plumber. Free software makes it easier to file your own taxes and save hundreds on an accountant. In contrast, some skills require so much time and money to learn that you'd be better off outsourcing them. Learning to install a new fuel pump in your car, for example, requires such a heavy investment in the proper tools and know-how that it may be worth paying for a professional. Here are Fisker's tips on how to build a diverse, resilient skill set. Tip number 1: learn by doing. Tip number 2: leverage increasing returns, avoid diminishing returns. Tip number 1: learn by doing. Whenever a problem comes up in your life, try to solve it yourself rather than hire an expert. Fisker argues that hands-on experience is the most effective way to learn anything. If needed, he recommends using books and online resources to teach yourself before your first attempt at solving the problem. Often, people overestimate how difficult it is to do a task yourself. You'll be able to gain basic competence in almost any skill in a remarkably short time. Short-form note: when trying to decide whether to solve a problem yourself or hire an expert, weigh the risk of making expensive or dangerous mistakes. While online resources like YouTube have made learning household skills more accessible, some argue that they've also caused people to underestimate how difficult certain tasks are. If you mistakenly assume you know enough to complete a project after just watching 1 or 2 videos, you risk doing property devaluing, structural damage to your home, or even seriously injuring yourself if you're tackling something like electrical work. Consider choosing low-risk projects like finish carpentry instead, at least when you've just begun building your DIY skills. Tip number 2: leverage increasing returns, avoid diminishing returns. In every area of your life, invest enough resources to achieve increasing returns, then stop and invest elsewhere once you begin receiving decreasing returns. According to Fisker, following this guideline will show you how much effort you should invest in each of your diverse skills. What are increasing returns in this context? Fisker asserts that as you invest effort into improving your life in a certain domain, the rate at which you receive benefits like money, health, and happiness increases. Each additional hour of effort will gain you more benefits than the previous one. However, this is only true up to a point. If you invest too much time and money in an area of life, they begin yielding diminishing returns. At this point, it's more efficient to do something else. For example, learning how to set up a website for your online business may take you 3 hours and earn you $1,000 a month in online sales. However, learning how to create a slick custom design for your website may take 12 more hours and only earn you an additional $100 a month. In this case, it's financially efficient to invest enough time in your website to make basic sales, increasing returns, then stop investing time in unimportant web design, decreasing returns, and learn how to optimize your business in other ways. For instance, you could further diversify your business skills by learning how to pull traffic to your website with advertisements. How to avoid negative returns. Fisker asserts that avoiding diminishing returns is valuable because it lets you do something else more productive, but others claim that sometimes even doing nothing yields more benefits than working more. Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a**ck, argues that at a certain point, investing effort in a given area of life will not only yield diminishing returns, but also eventually yield negative returns. For example, if you spend too long designing a website for your online business, you risk overthinking the design and making it more confusing than it was before, losing sales you would have otherwise made. Manson contends that, in particular, the majority of creative work eventually yields negative returns. Thus, he recommends limiting your creative work to just a few hours a day and intentionally scheduling leisure time to do nothing productive. This way, you can rest your mind and ensure that the next time you do creative work, your effort will once again yield increasing returns. New section: Tips for Investing Savings. To retire as quickly as you can, as Fisker did, all you have to do is save enough money that the fund and investment returns cover your annual expenses for the rest of your life. Given how unpredictable the economy is, in particular, the rate of inflation and performance of your investments, it's impossible to know with 100% certainty how much money will be enough to last the rest of your life. As a ballpark estimate that discounts these factors, Fisker assumes a 3% annual return on investment and asserts that if you accumulate a fund that's 34.33 times your annual expenses, you can retire and live off the investment returns forever. This is because you need enough that a 3% return covers your annual expenses, plus a year's worth of expenses to spend while your investments earn money. 33.33 plus 1 is equal to 34.33. How much do you really need to retire? In the FIRE community, the most popular way to calculate how much you need to save before retirement is the 4% rule. When your annual expenses are 4% of your total retirement fund, you can retire and survive by withdrawing 4% of that fund every year. FIRE adherents draw this number from a 1998 paper known as the Trinity Study, the most popular historical analysis of various hypothetical investment portfolios. Unlike Fisker's 3% estimate, this model takes inflation and varying investment returns into account. The Trinity study determined that at any point since 1929, someone retiring with a fund big enough to support a withdrawal rate of 4% had an extremely low chance of running out of money over the course of a 30-year retirement. Thus, if history repeats itself, a 4% withdrawal rate or, in other words, a fund 25 times your annual expenses is a safe bet. You may assume that if you want an early retirement that lasts longer than 30 years, the Trinity study doesn't apply and you'll need to save more. However, some experts argue that a fund allowing for 4% withdrawals still has a good chance of lasting indefinitely. This is true for a number of reasons. If you receive Social Security payments, they'll help your fund last. Also, annual expenses often naturally decrease with age, giving you more financial wiggle room. Finally, if you retire early, you may end up earning money with a hobby or business you pursued for fun. You might worry that if all your savings are in investments, you risk losing everything in a major economic downturn. However, Fisker assuages this fear, arguing that if your investments have fallen enough to ruin your retirement, it's likely that the entire economy has sunk into an unprecedented depression. If this were to happen, your remaining savings would still leave you more secure than traditional workers who depend on their wages as their only source of income, as businesses would collapse, unemployment would skyrocket, and jobs would become extremely scarce and competitive. Short-form note: what could cause the kind of economic collapse Fisker describes? For Americans, one possibility is that the United States could default on its national debt. If this happened, global confidence in the U.S.'s financial system would plummet, along with the value of the American dollar. With less purchasing power, the demand for consumer goods would drop, causing businesses to slow production or shut down. Jobs in construction and manufacturing would be the first to disappear, as these industries are the most sensitive to changing consumer demand. However, if you still had savings, as Fisker asserts you would, you could profit as the dollar drops in value by investing in foreign stock markets or commodities. We've established that investing your savings is the safest path to total financial freedom. But how do you invest your savings well? Here are Fisker's tips. Tip number 1: educate yourself on investing strategy. Tip number 2: pick investments based on the work you prefer. Tip number 1: educate yourself on investing strategy. Fisker recommends learning the foundational principles of investing rather than blindly trusting the financial advice of others when choosing your investments. By personally understanding the principles at work, he says you can significantly reduce the risk of any investment and greatly increase your returns. The more money you've accumulated and invested, the more time you should spend learning how to manage it. Since smarter decisions earn you more money as your fund size increases, educating yourself on investing strategy will eventually become more profitable than any other way you could spend your time. Counterpoint: don't bother becoming an investing expert. In I Will Teach You to Be Rich, Ramit Sethi offers a counterpoint to Fisker, arguing that the stock market is so complex and unpredictable that it's extremely difficult to create a fund that grows faster than the economy at large, no matter how much expertise you have. As evidence, he asserts that if you inspect the data, mutual fund managers only beat the market around 25% of the time. Whereas Fisker writes that the time you spend educating yourself becomes more profitable as your fund grows, Sethi contends that active fund management often results in losing money through trading fees. Thus, instead of becoming an investing expert, Sethi recommends creating an automated investment system in which you choose a few simple funds to invest in, set up automatic monthly contributions, and walk away. Tip number 2: pick investments based on the work you prefer. The specific assets you invest in should depend on how you like to spend your time, according to Fisker. A day you spend researching the most promising commodities will look very different from one you spend working closely with a tech startup as an angel investor. Research various investments and choose whatever interests you most. Short-form note: if the types of investments that interest you the most aren't registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission, you must become an accredited investor before you're legally allowed to invest. This law seeks to protect casual investors from the potentially catastrophic financial risks inherent in complex investments like venture capital or hedge funds. You automatically become an accredited investor if you earn over $200,000 a year, or have a net worth of more than $1 million.